Hello and welcome. Now come on in. We got plenty of seats. So good to see all of you. I'm Penny Kemp, the President and CEO here at the Max. Thank you. We're doing something a little different. It's what we've been trying for a while now, and it's wonderful to see people upstairs in the museum. I've heard a couple of people say, I've never been up here before. Who knew, right? So that's part of what this is about. But it's also about celebrating Mississippi arts and culture. And Patrick Sansone is certainly part of that and a real treasure from right here in Meridian, Mississippi. So Patrick, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So I'm not going to do a stuffy bio or anything like that because you don't. I know you, right? You're not stuffy. You're anything but. It does warrant saying you are a critically acclaimed musician, songwriter, composer, and photographer. People may not know that. Founding creator of Autumn Defense, right? Later joined Wilco, one of my favorite bands ever, and anybody that knows me knows that I'm not making that up. I did not want to stalk you at those shows. I did not let you know I was in the audience, but I was there. And then Mellotron Variations.
That's right.
I just watched your NPR Tiny Desk. I encourage folks to check it out. I did not know what a Mellotron was, and now I do, and it sounds lovely, especially in his hands. And of course, you're a Meridian native, a fellow Meridian high schooler. Go Wildcats, go public school, and University of Southern Miss, right? Did I dream that?
That's right. I graduated from Southern in '92.
There you go. Yeah. So thank you for being here.
Well, it's great to be here. Thank you for the invitation. It's really wonderful.
Well, this is going to be real informal. I'm going to ask some questions, and then maybe at the end we'll do a little Q&A, emphasis on Q. In other words, don't be that guy, ask a question. But let's talk about your creative journey. Tell me what it was like growing up in Meridian and essentially in the backstage of the temple, right?
Well, yes. I mean, I've talked about this a lot. I mean, it's such a part of the foundation of who I am as a person and who I am as a musician, as an artist in general, and just a curious human being about art and culture and music. As I'm sure everyone in this room knows, my father is Tony Sansone, the one and only Tony Sansone. There's only one. There can only be one. And when I was a kid, I just thought that was normal. It wasn't until I was older and that I could reflect on it to just see how unique it was that I had a backstage view, an inside view to so much magic, so many legendary performers, deep talent on the stage at the Temple Theater. It's hard to put into words, but I feel like, he gave that to me without a lot of fanfare. And he was so humble about it. He was so humble about what he was doing for this community. I talk about this all the time, is that I met so many legends and saw all those incredible performers in the 1970s and in the 1980s. And I didn't have my picture taken with any of them. And a lot of that was because Tony, I think, was so... I think Tony wanted to really respect the performers' space and their energy, and he didn't want to sort of impose or sort of inject himself into that. He wanted to let them have their time, let them feel like they were the stars that they were. He was really protective of that. And me, just being a little kid, from the time I could walk, I was following him around, going down to the temple and shadowing him. That was part of my shadowing of him, was that, I just I didn't want to inject myself in that way either. So unfortunately, I don't have photographic evidence of all these incredible things that I experienced as a kid. And it all kind of just exists in this sort of like magical childhood memory place, which is beautiful in itself and has its own poetry. But it has everything to do with how I do, why I do what I do as an artist, and how I approach it. So I owe a great debt to him for giving me that education in that way. And I've talked to a lot of people from here that they still talk about those shows, and I have a deep understanding of the impact that made on people's lives.
That's great. How do you think it influenced you in terms of your confidence in pursuing a career in music? I mean, I will tell you, playing off of a little bit about what you said about being backstage with musicians and all that. I mean, I helped open the Riley Center, and we took a similar approach. We followed Tony's lead, right? Dennis and I, we treated them, gave them their space. I never took selfies or, photos, etc. But I would imagine that had to have had a tremendous impact in terms of thinking, hey, maybe I can do that one day. And when I think about the Max and what it's supposed to do and getting kids to go, I'm from a little bitty town in Mississippi. These guys did it. I can do it. So talk a little bit about that.
Well, absolutely. I mean, just to have direct exposure to that. I would go down to the theater in the morning with him when the box office was opening and watch him open the ticket boxes and look at the seating chart, and then the stage crew would show up and I'd see that happen, and then at some point the artists would arrive in the early afternoon and I'd see them come in their street clothes, and I just watched the whole thing unfold. And I still have really vivid memories of kind of like that hour or so before the show would start, after the sound check had happened, and then the people coming in. Tony used to love to watch the crowd coming in. He would sort of like kind of peek from behind the curtain. He loved to see everyone filing in. I think that just made him feel, well, you'd have to ask him, but I could tell that was really important to him, to see the excitement on people's faces, and he just loved the energy that it just created. There's a magic in that. It's a creative act, in its own way. I mean, it's taking an empty canvas, the empty canvas of the empty Temple Theater, and sort of painting it with people, and he loved seeing that unfold. And I loved being there, watching him watch that, and that sort of that little magical thing that happens in that hour before the show, when people are, have expectation and they're excited, and the lights go down, and then the artist who I saw earlier in the day in their street clothes is now in their, and really, I've told this story many times, but the best illustration of it is in my memory was seeing Gladys Knight, who I just saw was playing here and soon.
Yeah.
So this was in the night
at the Riley Center.
At the Riley,
right?
right? So this was probably in the late 70s, and having seen her earlier in the day and then standing on the side of the stage right before she goes out on stage, and all of a sudden now she's in her silver sparkly dress and she looks like a star, and the lights go down. Bob Holland probably introduced her with that voice. And she walks on stage and the spotlight hits her, and and it's just this like explosion of energy. It's just like, it's magic. And those moments are so imprinted on my consciousness and my personality, that has everything to do with what I do and how I look at what I do, and sort of the respect for the magic and the poetry of performing.
That's great. I have to say I'm one of those people that attribute Tony and Ken Rainey, both of whom will be with us later downstairs when we're done. I remember going to the singer-songwriter night during Jimmy Rogers Festival and just being enchanted by the storytelling. I think that my love of live music comes from those early days, and also seeing those artists that we would later see on the CMA, Horizon Award winners. It was like, wait, I just saw her. I just saw him, literally on stage. And it took something as a kid, now with phones and things, but at that particular time it was television, right? And it was destination TV, and you were like, oh, that's a real human being that I saw perform in my own little small town. And that has a tremendous impact, I think, on young people in terms of the arts. I mean, we know from research that exposure to the arts at an early age results in better academic performance. Integrating the arts into the classroom results in lower disciplinary problems, greater attendance, higher academic performance, all of that. So it's for folks that think about the arts as being frivolous, it's anything but, right?
Well, it's essential, to my life. I can only, speaking for myself, it is essential. It's part of the foundation of my life. And I think, it is, art and culture and music and, these are the things, this is like the connective tissue of our society. This is the stuff that connects us all, that, as it gives us a shared experience that we can enjoy together, that we can relate to together, that tells us, we're not alone in our experiences and in our emotions and in our, our troubles and our joys, and so this is the stuff of life, That's why things like having this here, which is an amazing place, I spend a lot of my time on the road going to museums. That has become a big part of my life's practice. It wasn't always that way, but I'd say especially in the last 10 years, last 15 years, I make it a point when we're touring to go to the museums in the towns where we are, whether I have a day off or just an afternoon. I have rushed through so many museums. I've become the expert at running through museums. If I have 2 hours, which is usually never enough, but so that is a very important experience for me, and it keeps me grounded when I'm traveling, and it keeps this part of my mind excited and flexible, and to just the knowledge that there's a great museum here in my hometown makes me feel wonderful, to know that if someone's in Meridian, Mississippi for a few hours, they can come here and have that experience here, because I know how important it is for my life. And that's why it's important for, towns to have, to know a town has a great museum, has a great record store, record stores are important, and bookstores and a lot of these things that are disappearing from our culture, sadly, but these are the things that are connectors. There are a lot of things that have happened in my artistic life that would not have happened had I not gone to a cool record store and run into somebody and had a conversation, which led me to this, which then led me to that. This is, or going to a cool bookstore and seeing something I'd never seen before that pointed me to this, that pointed me to that. We have to have these things if we want our culture to continue to expand and breathe,
Talk a little bit about Meridian and how you kind of alluded to it earlier. You've traveled a lot. You're in a lot of major markets, much larger than ours. What is the significance of Meridian having, and this isn't self-serving, this isn't about the Max per se, but the Max is one example, the Riley Center, the Temple. We have two historic theaters that are phenomenally beautiful spaces, beautiful acoustics, etc. We have 6 museums, 5 other than the Max, right here in downtown Meridian. Talk about the significance of the size of our community and the arts and cultural assets that you see here, as compared to a major market. How do we stack up?
Well, I haven't spent a lot of time in Meridian in the last 20 years or so, so knowing that these things are happening here makes me, it's great knowing that, that makes a part of me and my history. And, this is my hometown. This place is a part of me. So knowing that sense of possibility is here is very important. And, it makes me feel great. We play a lot of theaters. Wilco's, we're not a stadium band. Our sweet spot really is kind of these beautiful historic theaters like all over this country. So I spend a lot of my performing time in those kinds of places. And they all, of course I can't help but think about the Temple. Every one of those theaters that I go into, whether it's King's Theater in Brooklyn, New York, or the Tennessee Theater in Knoxville, or
one of my favorites.
It's a beautiful theater. Mm-hmm. Or the Alabama Theater in Birmingham. They have this kind of cathedral-like feeling to me, because they're so beautiful, and there's so much beauty in those places. They kind of elevate as soon as you walk into them, they kind of elevate your consciousness, And if you're a performer, to perform in places like that, you're already, just because you're in such a place that is a work of art itself, it makes you rise to the occasion, to step to that. So, but I always think about the Temple when I'm in those places, because the Temple is such a beautiful theater. It's unusually beautiful. It's got so much history. And, for me personally, I hate the idea of a world without the Temple Theater.
I think it makes several of us, hopefully most people in this room, feel the same way.
Yeah,
it would be and I've said this before, I don't think anyone looks back on the renovation of the Grand Opera House, which is now the Riley Center, and says, well, that was a dumb idea.
Oh, it's incredible.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, look at what's happened to downtown. If you think about, it was between 15 and 20 years ago, right? If I can do the math. Don't judge, Fred. 2006 it opened, right? September 2006. I remember that. I was there. I was there before it opened. So that's important to note. I was there before it opened, and I moved back to Meridian in 2005, right before Katrina, and to work for the Riley Center. And there was still a lot of skepticism in this town, as we are wont to do, right? There was a lot of, why are they doing that? Why are they spending all this money? They could tear it down and build a new one for less. No, you couldn't. And then it took a while, but I don't think anyone looks at that now and says, well, we shouldn't have done that. The temple's the same way. We've got to save that, right? It needs some TLC. It needs some love, so that it can be here. And there's a place for it. We've talked about that just from there's a difference between a 900-seat theater and a 1,1400. Don't quote me on the numbers again.
So 2006 is when it opened? Because I think it was...
The Riley Center,
okay.
Yes. September 2006.
And then, my band, the Autumn Defense, played there in 2007. You did the lights. It was an amazing...
I was in the audience.
That light show, by the way, was... I still think about it. But seriously, that was a beautiful night. I mean, and I remember just being, again, just when you're in a place that's that beautiful, it just makes you perform better. It makes you want to match that that level, of beauty that you're in. So that was an amazing night, and I remember my bandmates just being really taken with, just blown away by the place and the sound, and that was a perfect stage for the Autumn Defense. I mean that was exactly right. We wouldn't have been right on the Temple stage, although that would be wonderful. Right. But Wilco had an amazing night on the Temple stage. I mean that's for me in my performing career. That's one of the high points and one of my favorite stories to tell is how all that happened. So
we'll let you tell it. Was that 2008-ish?
I think it was maybe 2005 or it was before the Autumn Defense. I'm glad you're here because
it's funny. I don't remember it that way, but I'm not. For some reason
you're right.
For some reason, I have in my mind that it happened after the Riley Center opened. But I remember being in the Temple for your, and I thought I lived here, but maybe it was 2005. Whatever. Anyhow. It was a magical night,
right.
No question.
And I've told this, and forgive me if a lot of people have heard me tell this story before, but I mean that night, the way that show happened was because Tony came to see Wilco at Radio City Music Hall in New York City, and I had been in the band this was maybe a year and a half after I'd been in the band. I hadn't been in the band that long. And we're playing Radio City Music Hall. I got to get Tony up there. So Tony and my sister Christy came up for the show. And I think it was the first time that Tony really had a sense of, oh yeah, this is a real gig. Like he's got a real gig now, Wilco wasn't really on his radar,
I got to tell you, I don't want to interrupt you because I want you to tell the story, but I distinctly remember standing in the lobby of the Riley Center and him looking at me and saying, "Penny, my boy made it. He made it," and it was the pride. I mean, it was yeah.
Well, one of my favorite Tony quotes is that, Wilco is the most famous band that no one's ever heard of. And he's right, and that's a very Tony thing to say. But so he came up to see us at Radio City, and it was wonderful, and I was just so happy that he could be at Radio City regardless of us being there. But just as much as we know how much he loves old theaters and loves showbiz and performance, I was just happy that he could be there. But within a week, he called me and said, well, Patrick, that was really great show, and yeah, you guys are good. You guys got a real. I was thinking maybe we could do something at the Temple. Already his producer mind was the wheels were already turning, and I was like, well, Tony, that's a great idea, but I'm the new guy. I'm the new guy in the band. I've only been in this band for 14 months. I can't go to management and say, hey, we got to play my dad's theater. That's not how this is working right now. But if you want to go through all the same channels and the same steps that any promoter would take to book Wilco at, I'm not going to stop you, but I can't just wave that wand and make that happen. And I don't want to do that yet. And he said, well, I understand. About 6 months later, he calls me and says, well, looks like we got a Wilco date at the Temple Theater. I was like, no way. I was surprised, but not surprised that, so he made it happen, or he and Ken made it happen. And, so we got through with that conversation, and then I thought about it for a second. Then I called him back and I said, well, Tony, I was thinking about it, and how are you gonna, because he hadn't been doing a lot of shows at that time. I was like, well, do you have a website set up, or do you you're gonna have people coming from probably all over the South, maybe all over the country. I mean, our fans are kind of like that. So,
and they will come all over for historic theaters like the Temple, like
destination.
The
yeah,
Center.
I mean, that's one thing about our fan base is they love a destination show. So it's like, how are you going to sell tickets on? I mean, this was 2007. So how are you going to sell tickets online? And he was like, well, we might. I don't know. I might talk to somebody over at the community college. Maybe they can help out with that or something. But we'll probably just do it like we always did it. And I was like, well, what do you mean how you always... And he's like, well, like in the old days, if somebody wanted to come from out of town, they'd just, call me up and I'd pick them out a seat and they'd send me a check in a self-addressed stamped envelope. I'd get that, and I'd get their check. I'd take it to the bank, deposit it. Once it cleared, I'd put a couple of tickets in, and then send it back to him. I was like, Tony, that is never gonna work. You can't do it that way. I mean, and he said, well, we'll figure it out. Well, you're probably right. We'll do something. We'll get something worked out. Well, they didn't get anything new worked out, and the show went on sale, and it sold out in 2 days or 3 days. And it was, obviously a lot of people from here and who walked up and bought tickets or called in, but there were people from all over the country that came, that called the number. Tony answered the phone, asked them what they did for a living. Do you have any kids? What do they do? The whole, just the whole thing. I picked him out a ticket. They sent him a check, and the show sold out. So it meant that night, the night of the show, that every single person in that audience had a conversation with Tony Sansone. If they didn't already know him first, if they didn't already know him for years and years, now they still knew him now because he'd had him on the phone for an hour. So it was just there were so many layers to why that night had meaning for me, to now perform on that stage, a stage where as a child I had stood and watched all these musicians and performers rehearsing and sound checking and entertaining. And first time I ever played an electric guitar was on that stage because Helen Reddy's guitar player let me play his Fender Stratocaster when I was 9,
Wow.
First time I ever played a synthesizer was on that stage because the keyboard player from the Little River Band let me play his synthesizer. Things like this. These are very deep memories for me, and now I'm on that stage doing it, and just knowing the connection that the room had, not only with my not only Tony's history, but my mother performed on that stage dozens of times, with the Lively Arts Quintet, as an opening act for some big people. So I saw my mother as being a superstar when I was a child, with her incredible voice. And that's a deep impression for me. My grandmother sang on that stage. She was Tony's mother, Marguerite, was an amazing singer and traveled as a professional singer in the 1930s and 1940s. She had a radio show down in New Orleans. We recently just found, I know I'm rambling here, but we recently just found a box of letters. She would go down to New Orleans and perform on a radio station down there. She had a regular show where she would kind of do like cowboy songs. This was in the 1930s. And it was a box of letters of people that would write into the station to her requesting songs. And it would be like, and she had a stage name that was, I think it was Sunny Stevens, We listened to your show 2 weeks ago and you sounded beautiful when you sang, blah, blah, blah. We were wondering, on the next show, could you sing this song? I mean, 100 of these letters. How incredible is that, So anyway, all these layers of history between Tony and his family, who a lot of them were musicians and loved music and had a deep appreciation for music, and my mother and her deep appreciation for music and her deep talent, and kind of the Temple Theater sort of being the sort of center point for all of that. So to perform that night was heavy. It was heavy stuff.
Well, I'm pretty sure there were not many dry eyes in the house that night when you honored your dad, when you brought him out on stage. And even me right now thinking about it, because it's important. We need to give folks their flowers while they're here, right?
Well, he didn't. During those years, he didn't take a bow for it. He stayed behind the scenes, so he never really took that bow in a real, and that's just him. He likes to create a scene. He likes to make a happening, but he doesn't necessarily want to be the center of attention, So to bring him out on stage that night and let him take that bow was important for me. Yeah.
Well, I love that we're also putting him at the center of attention this weekend too, and bringing him back home, welcoming him. That's really, it's important. It's important to recognize those who have done so much before us to lay a path. And when you look at downtown Meridian and what the opportunities are here, and the impact that the arts and culture has on our young people, so shift a little bit to talk about nurturing future creatives and what that looks like. And I'm genuinely seeking your input, your advice, your recommendations on what we can do as a community and what we can do at the Max to help nurture those future creatives. Grayson Culpepper is a young musician that many of you know, who's performed all over Meridian, including here. And his father said to me one day when he was performing downstairs with a lot of other young musicians, and he said, "You got to understand, this is Grayson's football field." Ooh, that resonated with me. And his mom also said, Meridian has the potential to be a feeder market to Nashville. That's big, right? That's a big idea. So do you have any thoughts on any of those things I just said, and what our role is, what our role should be, what do we do to build on the momentum of this last 20 years and what Tony has done for us, and how do we keep it going?
Well, I think this kind of thing is a very simple but important place to start. I mean, conversation is how these things, it's the spark that makes these things go, I mean, like we were saying, whether it's at a record store or a bookstore or in a museum, or on a radio show. I mean, it's an exchange of ideas, So to have a place like this where these kinds of things can be talked about, number one, is vital, And I think, as we were talking about before, that I think you were kind of saying you haven't really done this kind of thing much here, but I think trying to do more of this kind of thing is a great place to start, because it just gets people talking. It just gets ideas. It gets the wheels turning. I mean, I'm certainly no expert. I'm just an artist who had a very unique experience growing up. It's a very, very unique thing that I was able to experience as a kid, but it takes a person like Tony and Ken and others, yourself, who's doing your work that you're doing here, to just encourage people to enjoy art, to enjoy the experience of music, and it not be, intimidating or separate or other. So many times, like, we kind of get it, it's easy, especially in like small towns, whereas there's this sense that, well, there's, art and culture, but that's for out there, and, but it's for everyone. I mean, that's why it exists. It is about everyone, and so just having a place like this and getting the energy out there that it is for everybody. I mean, personally, I mean, when I first came here and saw this facility, my first thought was like, I hope people come here. I really do, because this is amazing. It's beautiful.
And come upstairs.
Go over there, because this is unusually special. Not every town has this.
I would say not many towns
not
have
many
this.
Towns
I mean, what's
do.
here reflects what you would expect in a major market, in a major city.
So, that's important, and, I know the world is changing. The world has changed a lot since I was a kid, obviously, and it's changing all the time, but I know that people are still hungry for these kinds of experiences. If they weren't, they wouldn't keep coming to see Wilco, and they wouldn't keep going to music festivals, and they wouldn't keep listening to podcasts about music, and they wouldn't keep going to museums, and it's so people want connection. I know that people want to feel connected to their culture, and I just hope that we can keep. I just hope that things can keep happening to make people feel included and welcomed and invited,
And I think the arts have a way of doing that like nothing else, right? In terms of making us feel connected, and giving people the opportunity to live up to their full potential. There is nothing like watching school children file in to the Riley Center, to the Grand Opera House, or to come into this building and see all of these people, and they don't know who these people are, right? I mean, they come in here, these youngsters, they don't know who they are, but they hear the stories, they learn the stories, they get engaged, and you can see that spark, and that's what this is about, I think.
And a lot of obviously, like myself, or Steve Forbert, or Marty Stewart from down the road. I mean, we had to leave, to kind of follow our muse, to find our to follow our path, and but the foundations of the experiences that we had here, or have everything to do with how we took that into the broader world. And to be from Mississippi, which is so rich, I mean, the soil is rich, the air is thick, the history is heavy, there's a lot, it's complex, it's problematic, it's complicated, it's joyous, it's all of these things. It's just rich. It's like rich soil, and it's not something I really appreciated until I left. I mean, like I was saying before, when I was a kid and just hanging out at the theater with Tony and getting all this incredible experience, I just thought, oh well, this is just normal, I just thought that's the way it was. It wasn't until later that I went, oh my God, like how lucky was I to get that education and to be where I was from. I mean, when I was 11, 12, 13, and I was starting to play guitar and become obsessed with music. I mean, I was, I mean, when I was a little kid, Elvis was my guy. And I got that from my grandmother.
Okay, I'm impressed. Elvis, not Beatles. I would have.
Well, the Beatles. I got hit by the Beatle.
But I'm happy with the Mississippi selection.
Well,
just so I'm clear.
Well, this is. I'm leading towards something here that the Beatle rays hit me when I was about 11. John Lennon died, and all of a sudden I started hearing that music and I was changed, I was like, oh. So in my dream world for several years there, I wasn't living in Meridian, Mississippi. I was living in London in 1967, And I just kind of went into that world and sort of, started playing guitar and learning that music. And then that led me to lots of other things and kind of learning the vocabulary of rock and roll and pop music so I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, it wasn't really until many years later, kind of after I had left Mississippi and thinking back on it, that I really realized how special it was to be from here. And I think that's a normal experience for young artists, is that if you're a creative, sensitive, artistic person, you're restless. I mean, that's part of it. And you kind of need to be, I think. It's your restlessness that opens your mind, But I did start to understand how important it was that I was from here and what that did for me as an artist. and how much of a part of me it is. And I had the incredible fortune and opportunity to, I've met lots of amazing artists. You know, we toured with Neil Young, and I've met a lot of greats, you know. But about 12 years ago, I was at a party, and I turned around and I was standing next to Paul McCartney. And yeah, whoa. And the drummer in our band who I was standing next to said, I turned around and my eyes were just kind of like, and I turned back around and I just said, "Hey Paul, how's it going?" And the bass player in Wilco was there, and he came over and he introduced himself, and we all kind of said our hellos. It was Grammy night. We had played at the Grammys, and he had performed at the Grammys. So we were complimenting him, you know, "Oh, we saw your set. You sounded amazing tonight. It was just so incredible to see you perform." And he was very, very kind, and he was there with his wife, and he was there with Elvis Costello, and it was a heavy scene. But after we kind of just said our hellos, there was a little bit of a lull in the conversation, and I tapped him on the shoulder, and I don't know why I had the gumption to do this, but hell, I'm at a party with Paul McCartney. When else am I going to get to do this? But I just said to him, well, as it turns out, my mother's family name is McCartney. My mother's maiden name is McCartney. So I was able to tell him that, And I said, "Hey, Paul." And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "I just wanted to tell you, my mother is a McCartney." And he went, "Wow, man, really? Wow. Well, man, it's not a very common name." And I was like, "Yeah, I know." He's like, well, tell me, man, where's she from? Is the family from Scotland or Ireland? What's the story, man? I was like, "Well, I don't really know a whole lot about the genealogy of that, but I do know that they made their way to Mississippi, because that's where I'm from. So I'm a Mississippi McCartney." He was like, "Oh, Mississippi, cool, man. Yeah, Elvis, we love Elvis. He's great, Yeah, we love that. The blues, man. The blues are great, man. We love that. Yeah, Mississippi, man. Mississippi's cool, And I was like, "Well, when I was a kid growing up in Mississippi, I wanted to be from where you're from." He's like, "Oh, man, we all wanted to be like Mississippi blues guys, man." So I was like, wow, this is like I was like, my mind just was like, it was just blown. But it was such an incredible full circle moment to have that conversation with, arguably the Mozart of our times. Someone who had influenced my life so much as an artist, talking about Mississippi, and how important Mississippi was to him and all his generation of rock and rollers from England at that time. The whole reason that Mick Jagger and Keith Richards met each other was because they were on the same bus, like after school one day, and Mick Jagger noticed that Keith Richards had some Muddy Waters records. That's the reason they started talking. So
that's
think
really
about
cool.
that.
That's really cool. I did not know that. That's
a long story just to say that, I think just as far as like young artists go, you have to give them a place that is a illustration of potential, and just an example of what is possible, which is what places like this are, which is what going to things at the Riley Center are, which is what going to things at the Temple is. It just makes you feel like there's possibility in life.
Thank you. That's beautiful. tell us a little bit about your current projects, things you're doing, and I'm mindful of time. We'll get downstairs in a few minutes. We may have opportunity for one or two questions, but tell us what you're up to and when we might see you here again.
Well, I'm currently in the middle of, my band, the Autumn Defense, and we haven't put out a record in 10 years, and that wasn't intentional. It just kind of happened. There was a little thing called the pandemic that kind of got in the way of a lot of things and kind of threw things out of whack. We didn't intend to take that much time away from it, but that's what happened. But we have been working on a new album, and we're almost finished. So the Autumn Defense will have a new album out next year. So I'm in the middle of mixing and finishing that. I've also been performing with the band Big Star, which I don't know how many people here know Big Star, but Big Star were a band from Memphis, that made records in the 1970s that were very much influenced by the Beatles. They were sort of like a Southern Beatles in a way. Alex Chilton was the main singer and songwriter of the band, and there was another songwriter in the group who passed away when he was in his 20s. They made 3 records that were all brilliant and now considered some of the most influential records of that era, but they didn't sell at all at that time. So they were kind of lost to time in a way, but over the decades, the records gained a cult following, and then by the 90s, all these important bands were citing them as a big influence. REM, Wilco, tons of bands. So they were a band that not a lot of people heard in the 70s, but they influenced a lot of other bands.
Full disclosure, thanks to you, they are now in my playlist.
Good. Well, they're some of my favorite albums, and this is just an incredible experience for me. And that was another thing. Like when I discovered them in my teens, I discovered them because I went to Bebop Record Shop in Jackson, Mississippi, which was a great record store, and I would go there in my teens sometimes to buy, kind of some of the harder to find things and meet some of the other weirdos like myself, of the time. And the record clerk behind the counter one day saw my stack of records that I had, and he just went and grabbed a Big Star record and put it on my stack and said, it was kind of like he was saying, you need to know this.
Well, that's kind of like what happens at the liquor store with the wine.
Well, that's another conversation. So put it on my stack. I went home and listened to it, and it immediately became some of my favorite music. It reminded me of so much music that I already loved. But the thing about it is that I could hear the southernness in it. And they were from Memphis, and they made this music in Memphis, just a few hours away from here.
We claim Memphis.
Yeah, exactly, right. And the photographer William Eggleston, who his image is proudly displayed here, is
in our Hall of Fame.
He's a big influence on my photography. He was friends with those guys, and he took the cover image for one of their albums. So there's a lot of things connected in there, but the reason I'm telling you this is that that was another experience I had as a teenager, and cut to now. I'm now performing with the original drummer from Big Star, and Mike Mills from REM, and a guy named Chris Stamey and John Auer, 2 other great musicians, and we're performing the music of Big Star with Jody, the original drummer, on drums, and we're going to Spain next month, and we just did a tour here. So that's been a big thrill for me. And another example of kind of, I'm sure I would have gotten to Big Star at some point, but having something like Bebop Record Shop, a place where these kinds of conversations can happen, just to create that spark and then there are times when I'm on stage playing that music with these guys and I'm looking around, I'm like, that guy's in REM. Like, I loved him when I was a teenager. That's Jody from Big Star. That's John Auer. And I just go, how did I get here? And it's really because of these things that we're talking about, So I'll be doing some more of that this year, finishing the Autumn Defense record. I'm finishing a new book of my photography that I'm hoping to have in production and available by the end of the year. And then I'm going to be playing some shows with Wilco in December. And
you might bring that photography here. We might.
There's some conversations about possibly having a exhibit of my photography here in 2026. So fingers crossed that will come to be.
Good idea. Anyone? That is one of the things I'm learning about creatives like yourself. It doesn't stop. It's genre defining. I mean, Walter Anderson exhibit downstairs right now. If you guys hadn't checked it out, that's my plug. Definitely go look at it and spend some quality time in there with the art and with his story.
I just saw it. It's beautiful.
It's really stunning. And he watercolor, muralist, sculptor, also a writer, and a lot of people don't know that, so Eudora Welty, right, writer, photographer, also a watercolorist. That was the new one for me. So it's fascinating to me. I mean, creatives are creative, and you have to create, and that's so much part of his story is that he didn't do it for commercial success. It was never about that. He went to China when he had his first, commercial showing. He put a note on his door and said, "Bye, gone to China," and skipped his.
China was his first show, his first commercial exhibit.
No, there was one in the States, and his family went to pick him up to take him to the exhibit opening.
He was like,
and
see ya.
He put a note on the door where he would normally put a note on the door that said, I'm gone to Horn Island, but this time it said, I'm gone to China. Yeah. So, I mean, that's how much it wasn't about fame for him. It was about the act of creating. And so just kudos to you and to others who pursue their craft and aren't limited, by one genre or one medium. So
it's all connected, I mean, it really is. I mean, there's I'm fascinated by the relationships between all of these things, between music and visual art and poetry and film, and it's all kind of part of this big swirling kind of energy of life and expression, and I've always been I think a curious person, and I try to, even as I get older, and now I'm in my mid-50s, with experience and the cynicism that can come along with that, I really do try to protect and encourage that curious teenager or that curious kid to stick around, and that's one of the reasons I do make it a practice to go to museums and go to things and just be in this kind of environment as much as I can be.
Thank you. That's beautiful. So, anyone have a burning question? Got time for one or two? Fred?
Can you talk just briefly, what's it like to be on tour with Wilco? What does that all involve?
Well, it usually it usually begins with a very strong cup of coffee. If I can roll off the bus and find one. There is a lot about being on tour that's kind of like Groundhog's Day, the movie. It's like, wake up in a parking lot, fill your day with things, do a sound check at 4, try to figure out something to do for a couple of hours, play a show, see people after the show, get on the bus, wake up in another parking lot, you know. So that's kind of the general shape of it. But for me, I mean, photography really changed the shape of touring life for me in a positive way. I really first picked up the cameras as a creative practice in the mid 2000s, like around 2007. And it wasn't really intentional, but I've always, liked to look at photography. I didn't really know a lot about fine art photography at all. I love film. I love cinematography and, interested in art and things. But I didn't have a vision of, I'm going to pick up the cameras and try to make my mark on the photography world. I just happened to buy this Polaroid camera that as soon as I started making images with it, it just kind of clicked for me, and it was just exciting. And it gave me something to do during the day on tour, instead of just waking up in a parking lot, getting my coffee, and then just hanging around, the venue, or, sitting on my computer or whatever it was. It just, it gave me something to ground my day, something to hang my day on. So I'd take my camera and go exploring these towns that I'd never been in, and making images, not really knowing what I was going to do with them. But, after a few years of that, I had thousands of photographs that I then had to figure out, well, maybe I should do something with this. And so I turned it into a book, and Nels Klein, the guitarist in Wilco, he knows a lot about art and photography, and he worked in one of the most respected art and photography bookstores in Los Angeles, and he knows a lot. So he's an art guy. So and that's another example of a multifaceted creative, And so when he started seeing this work, these photographs I was making, he was like, oh, that looks kind of like this photographer, or that reminds me of this, or you're doing something here, so that gave me a lot of encouragement to go, oh, okay, well, maybe I'll keep doing this, and so it's been a practice of mine for, over 15, almost 20 years. So a lot of my life on tour is finding the museum, going to look at art, and if we have a day off, I'll rent a car. Wherever we are, I'll get a rental car for the day, and I'll just drive and explore and take my cameras and just take pictures of weird things that I see, And it's just a way for me to be present.
Yeah. I share that. I played around with the camera on my own just as a hobby, and it does make you be really present and see things in a way that you don't otherwise. So
yeah, it kind of encourages you to be where you are, right.
Right.
And
it's almost like it gives you attention. I mean, an excuse to pay attention, if that makes sense. If you're someone who might always be thinking about what's on their to-do list and what to do next, and they're always trying to achieve that, putting a paintbrush, a camera, a guitar, whatever it is, it forces you to, this is what I'm doing now. This is what I'm going to be present with.
I do think about it as it's like a meditation. It's like a meditative experience for me. I woke up early this morning and drove around town. I'll take a lot of pictures when I'm here in town. On a day like today, when the light is just so incredible. And do we know who the graffiti muralist is in town? Who is it? Reggie Thomas. So many cool, I love it. Like these little.
Art Museum has a group that is painting all these murals.
Oh, okay. I love it. Like a little corner. Well, like a little corner of a building where there's like a crack in the side of the building, and then
Yeah.
somebody hit.
That's Reggie.
Well,
yeah,
I'm
he's a
I'm a
photographer,
fan.
video. He is an incredibly talented
Yeah.
human and a special soul.
Him and the art.
Yeah, well, it's very cool. So I was out taking a lot of pictures this morning. So
He would be honored to hear that.
Patrick, you performed March the 15th, 2006 at the Temple Theater in Wilco.
okay, 2006. Okay.
What I really want to tell you is that my son Henry and all these teenagers that are making their mark in alternative rock and roll, they are huge into Alex Chilton and Big Star, and I just texted them right then that Patrick is playing with the Big Star Quintet.
That's right. Yeah.
That's great. Thanks, Jackie.
Yeah, I'm singing those Alex Chilton songs. You know.
I love Alex Chilton with the letter.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, Alex, what an incredible story. 15 years old, 16 years old, singing the letter. Yeah, amazing.
In-
What are your top countries? What are some of those countries that you're
Where we tour?
that your fan base is?
Well, I mean, we've been all over the place. Spain seems to really like us a lot, which is cool for me because I really like Spain. We were just in Australia earlier in the year, which was amazing. We used to go to Australia fairly, every couple of years. We haven't been in over 10 years, so it was great to be back there. And we went back to Japan again this year, which was super fun.
Have you been to Singapore?
Never been to Singapore. Haven't been there yet. Only been to Japan in that part of the world, but yeah, we're very lucky. I mean, it's and Big Star is we're going to Spain later in the year as well. And we had an amazing tour there 2 years ago. So. Well, what a gift, and what a gift to be able to go to a place like Spain and play Big Star songs, and see people crying in the audience, like connecting to this music that was made up in Memphis. And here we are over in Spain singing these songs, and people are just having an emotional experience. This is the connectivity, this is the magic of the connectivity that we were talking about.
Yeah, arts definitely has a way of healing, connecting, empathy, executive function, all the things we need. I loved what you said earlier. It's essential, and that's no truer words. So I think with that, we'll leave it there unless you have any parting words for us. We'll help you celebrate Tony and all the wonderfulness he has done for this community, along with Ken Rainey and so many others.
Well, I just want to thank you for putting this together, having me, letting me share these thoughts, and thank all of you for coming. It's amazing to see so many familiar faces, and so just thank you.
Yes, thanks everyone, and special thanks to the Community Foundation of East Mississippi for helping support this and our efforts here, and all the others that support us, from the Riley Foundation to the Phil Hardin Foundation to all of you who are members of the MAX. Your support means the world to me. Keep it up. Keep coming. Bring your friends. Bring your family. I love seeing this place full. I love seeing people upstairs. And now will be the only time you'll hear me say, okay, let's go downstairs. But let's get downstairs and honor some pretty special people. Thank you.
Thank you.